Hello. You're listening to the director commentary track on 1917. I'm the director, Sam Mendes. Also, in this case, the co-writer and producer. And this movie, it's fair to say, was a labour of love based on stories my grandfather told me, Alfred Mendes, to whom the movie is dedicated at the very end. This became a really important shot for me. It was one of the ones I thought about the most. Because once you're committed to this idea of 2 hours of real time and committed to the idea of there being no cuts, and that's how I like to talk about the movie rather than a one-shot movie, which is a phrase that was not coined by me. I prefer to talk about it as a movie with no cuts, in other words, no way out, no jumps of time or space, and a gradual, unconscious realization, hopefully from the audience, that you're never going to leave these characters' side and you're going to have to experience every second that ticks by with them, take every step with them, whether it's hard or easy. This shot became important. One of the things I didn't want was to pan back and forth between characters. That felt to me like a badly edited scene rather than a one-shot situation. I wanted this constantly moving, this gradually moving push, which has a sort of threat in it. So I needed to stage many of the scenes in order to achieve that. And in this case, that meant having maps on two tables, starting with that push in on Colin Firth's character, having him turn round, having the boys come round to the next table and continue the push in on them. Although this seems like a simple shot, what we needed to achieve it was incredibly complicated. We built Erin Moore's dugout on a stage, and the first part of the shot was on a techno crane pushing across the table. The camera was then unhooked from the techno and panned now by hand and remotely by Roger Deakins. So it was held by grips and panned remotely by our wonderful cinematographer, Roger Deakins, who then pans back to Colin. And the techno crane in that time has retreated and the entire set opened up. The ceiling opened up, the back wall opened up, and the techno crane went back behind the wall closed just in time for the camera to see back into the room. I'm not going to talk a lot about the blends, morphs, stitches, the way in which the shots, which obviously were very long, were joined, but I will occasionally mention them because I think it's important to understand the rhythm and how sometimes those blend points were determined by the actors, sometimes by the locations, sometimes by a sense of rhythm, and how much a single operator sometimes could cope with in terms of the physical difficulty of shooting the scene. So this is one here. As he walks through that crowd, there's a simple wipe, just a very simple, we pass by a single upright soldier, and that formed the end of that shot, which started as they exit Erin Moore's dugout. So what you have is that would be called, in this case, the A side. The B side of that would be as they emerge out of that crowd of people. And that's a good example of a very lo-fi, in-camera technique, just to put two shots together that feels completely continuous and never stops you from focusing on the men. Often the trick is to make sure that those moments, those blends, those morphs happen at periods or moments of great drama or great speed or intensity, because that's the last thing you're thinking about. I was pleased with this idea that we came up with, that it's the rat and his desperation for food who triggers the wire and takes them completely by surprise. One of the things that happens when the movie screens with an audience is that they jump when the rat hits the ground and are still recovering from that when the big explosion goes and they jump again. And they're now one of my personal nightmares, which is being buried alive. And I suppose rats is another one of those. Anyone who has watched Skyfall will know I have a thing about rats. I don't like them very much. And some of them are escaping here as Blake tries to uncover his friend and check that he's still alive and still breathing. That image, like Francis Bacon's one of the screaming popes, I had that image in my head of Schofield with his mouth open, filled with dust, in the process of screaming and suddenly robbed of breath. But he manages to find a last gasp here and bring himself back to life. And then the nightmare of being buried alive continues. Obviously, Schofield's eyes are blinded by the dust, and he has to grip on to Blake for guidance. And that I wanted that feeling in the audience, that the roof was falling in and that everything was coming down on them. And we dropped an enormous amount on these boys and on our brilliant camera operator in this scene, Pete Cavacuti, who came out of the tunnel looking white as a ghost, covered in dust and stone. I like this imploring of Blake to jump across this blind space, this dark space when not being able to see. And as we come out of this tunnel, which was constructed, as I said, on stage, you start seeing the light ahead. And that diagonal beam that you see is coming up, that forms our blend point. That is a wipe, and when they come out the other side of the beam, we're on location. Now here I used a bit of 007 know-how. It's useful, having made 2 huge Bond movies over 5 years, to know how to combine visual effects, special effects, and a little bit of smoke and mirrors and some staging to try and construct this feeling of going from far in the distance to right up and inside it very, very quickly. And the sense of the reality of the burning plane and them having to pick him out of this scalding cockpit with his legs burning and his skin frying, really, this German pilot. And then the horrible, horrible irony of Blake being the person who says, no, don't kill him, get him some water, and in that moment of kindness, basically signing his own death warrant. This was very deliberate misdirection for the audience. That moment you're thinking, is that water going to run clear, is the moment you miss, he's been stabbed. And it only takes a second. Obviously Schofield shoots him, but this moment here, when he sees the blood and the look on his face, to me, I think that's one of the finest pieces of acting in the film. And it was helped immeasurably by the way in which we shot it, because we couldn't cut. We had to construct a pump that was actually contained within his kit bag on his back. So the blood was pumping out of him all the time. And there was something about the physical sensation of that for Dean that made him really feel like he was bleeding out. And I think that helped the scene hugely. And again in this movie, not breaking the shots up, not breaking the scenes up into their component parts, not fragmenting them, helped the actors live it rather than just act it. And this is a good example. This is all one take, 9 minutes, I think, 8.5 minutes. And, you know, he was bleeding out. There was blood pumping. Look how full of blood this bandage is. He has to get another bandage. He begins to understand how much he's bleeding, how dangerous this is, and how close he is to dying. And believe this if you will, the blood draining from Dean's face here, going almost blue, that is acting. We didn't touch his face at all in post until after he's dead, at which point we took a bit more colour out of it. But that extraordinary thing of the colour going out of his face, that's something that just happened naturally.
We have to find your brother.
What happens next was not planned. he gets absolutely knocked off his feet. I'd said to George beforehand, I said, there are 500 people here, all adrenalized, all know it's one shot. If you get knocked down or you get hit, just get up and keep running. And he did. And the results, I think, are pretty splendid.